All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you guys for coming out tonight. My name is Michael Kislak. I'm a civil engineer for the Department of Public Works. And we're here tonight to talk about the Safe Streets Greenwich project that we've been working on. The town has received a grant from FHWA to work on this SS4A Safe Streets for All project, and we've partnered with Stantec, a consulting firm, to help us put together a transportation safety action plan that covers the whole town. And so they've prepared a brief presentation tonight. So I'm going to kick it over to them, and then afterwards we'll have a little bit of a breakout activity. So feel free to join us for that afterwards if you like. And I think without further ado, I'll hand it over to Kate.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kate Fillionier. Should we go back one, Sarah? I'm Kate Fillionier. I am a transportation planner at Stantec, and we have been working with your fantastic folks at DPW on creating this Safe Streets Greenwich plan. So I'm going to quickly talk through the kind of overview of the plan and then the safety analysis that underscores it, just sort of give you a sense of what we've been doing so far and sort of what's next. So the plan is really, the goal here is to create a data-based plan that gives you guys a clear path for reducing traffic fatalities and severe injuries in the town. As Michael mentioned, it is funded by US DOT under the Safe Streets for All grant program, so that's abbreviated SS4A throughout here. So quick overview, just to sort of situate you in the plan. There are a lot of moving parts. We are in the middle of a safety analysis and policy analysis section. And a big part of that is getting community input and community engagement, which is what we're here to do tonight. And then we're going to take that and build it into a safety action plan and a final report. So the big thing to know about the Safe Streets Greenwich project and really SS4A projects in general is that they're built off of US DOT's what they call the safe system approach. And that's an approach that says that traffic fatalities and traffic injuries are unacceptable. And more than that, they're preventable if we are proactive about layering up a variety of different solutions and levers and tools we have to reduce the fatalities on our streets. And it means a bunch of different things. You know, it involves everything from education and thinking through driver's ed. It involves safer vehicles, the vehicles we drive and buy. It involves reducing or managing speeds better. It involves road design. It involves post-crash care, which really often can mean thinking through a better way of analyzing crashes after they've occurred so that we can prevent the next one. And the goal is to take all of those different layers and combine them. You know, one of the sort of core tenets of the approach is the idea of redundancy, which we often think of as a bad thing, but in this case, it's a good thing because people are imperfect, everyone makes mistakes, and there's no system that's perfect either. And so adding together all of those different layers allows us to go from the total possible universe of traffic fatalities down to that number of 0. So I'm going to take you through the safety analysis and just sort of how we're approaching this, this fundamental thinking through safety in the town of Greenwich. It takes 3 different types of data, and 3 actually very different types of data. It takes trends, it takes risk information, and it takes public input. And it puts them all together to create what we call a prioritized investment map, which is a roadmap to where the town can really focus its resources in order to address the problem. So I'm going to go through layer by layer. And the first is trends. So this is 5 years of crash data from the town of Greenwich, taking a look at some of the basic questions of where did the crash happen, and who was driving, and what time was it, and who was injured. And so I'm going to take you through all those different, the analysis so far on that front. So the overview is that over the course of our 5-year data span, there were 722 what we call injury crashes in Greenwich. And those are crashes where some kind of injury occurred. And of those, 43 resulted either in a fatal or a severe injury. This is, actually I should stop here on a data point to say that, so you'll see up there that term KSI. So that's our shorthand for killed and severely injured. We use that frequently throughout the presentation and the analysis. But one of the reasons why we use those two things together, the killed and severely injured, is it allows us to get a much more robust and nuanced picture of what's happening. One of the sort of hard realities of traffic fatalities and traffic injuries is that it's often a really fine line between a severe injury and a fatality. It's honestly inches and luck. And so combining those two data points together allows us to understand better what's happening. So stepping back, or maybe stepping in, I guess, the big picture is that over the course of the past 5 years, the total number of injury crashes in Greenwich has remained pretty flat. You know, there's an exception in 2020 when COVID hit and nobody went anywhere, but in general, pretty flat, pretty consistent. And that's actually sort of on par with sort of other towns that are similar to you in Connecticut. But what's also happening, and this is a national trend, is that the number of fatal and severe injury crashes is going up. You know, Greenwich is actually very impressive because you've actually already had a 0 year in terms of fatalities, that's 2022. But that's also a year when you had 10 severe injuries. So again, that combining of the fatalities and the severe injuries gives you a much better portrait of what's happening in terms of safety on your streets. So, geography, let's start there. The important piece, or sort of the really good piece of news here, is that all of Greenwich's fatalities and severe injuries are actually happening on a very small subset of roads. And when it comes to figuring out how to solve this problem, that's really, really good news, because it suggests that if we can really think about how we focus our resources on a subset of roads, we can actually really address that problem and get to that zero goal. Digging in a little bit, the bulk of those crashes are happening in the southern parts of Greenwich, probably on many streets that you guys might know or expect or recognize. I'm going to stop with a quick data point here just to say that this analysis excludes the freeways, so it doesn't have the Merritt, doesn't have 95, doesn't have 684. And the reason for that is because those are completely grade separated. They're not part of the town's network, and they're also not really controlled by they're not at all controlled by the town itself. We do include Route 1 because it is at grade, fully part of the town's network. And also because, you know, quite bluntly, it's been, you know, if you look through the traffic reports for the past however long you look through traffic reports, you know, East Putnam, that's the road that pops a lot of the time. It again is not controlled by the town. It is controlled by the state, and so we're really hoping that this analysis can help give some weight, some power, some, you know, oomph to the sort of conversations that the town can have with the state about coordination on some of the fixes along that road. So just zooming in one more quick layer, here are just two examples of some of those hotspot locations. Let's see, this is Greenwich and Arch, and let's see, Fairfield and North. What I want you to see is that it's not just the severe and fatal injuries that are happening here, it's all kinds of injuries. There's a lot of different stuff and a lot of clusters of different types of crashes happening in this location, and that's part of what makes it that hotspot. We looked at other trends. So for example, time of day. You know, as to be expected, most crashes happen during the day when people are up and moving around. What is unique in Greenwich is that spike that's happening around noon, 1 in the afternoon. We don't see that in other places. And so it's just sort of something we're kind of keeping an eye on because we're not quite sure why that's happening yet. We also took a look at days of the week. Again, most of the crashes are happening during the sort of typical work week. More people are moving around right then, so that makes sense. Maybe it's, you know, is there some relationship to the time of day? We're not sure, we're thinking it through, but it's sort of part of the conversation as we think about what are some of the policy levers that we can be thinking about as well, in addition to street design. We took a look at who was driving. And I want to caveat this one by saying that we're only in this case looking at fatalities, so it's a much smaller data set. But what we did find is that teenage and senior drivers, they're about a third of all of the total injury crashes, but they're actually the drivers in more than half of the fatal crashes. Again, it's a small data sample in this case, but we thought it was worthwhile pointing out, and again, makes us think about some of the other policy options that are maybe on the table around, you know, driver's licenses or other ways that those folks can get around town without driving. So there's that. And then lastly, we looked at who was getting injured and who was getting killed. What we know nationally and what we're seeing here is that folks who are outside of vehicles, the folks who are walking or biking or on a scooter, they are disproportionately injured. They're a pretty small percent. I think it's 13% of all of the injury crashes. They are 37% of the fatal and severe ones. And so if our goal here is to get to 0 traffic fatalities, this is the type of user groups that we would think about focusing extra attention on because they are so disproportionately being impacted. So that is trends. Then we looked at risk. And risk is where we take a look at kind of all the other stuff. So land use or road type or demographic groups, and try to identify places where it's kind of disproportionate, where the number of those people or that thing or that road type in Greenwich is somehow different from how much of an impact or how risky or how many people are getting injured there. So we looked at a bunch of different factors, and these are some of the ones that popped. And again, popped means there's a disproportionality between how prevalent it is in Greenwich and what's happening in terms of the crash data. So just to give you an example of how this works, if you look at the streets where the speed is 35 or greater, I think they're 9% of Greenwich's roads, but they're 26% of the KSI, and they are 67% of the cyclist KSI. So that's a road type where there's something's going on and we want to pay extra attention to it. The other way of looking at that is that injury crashes are 3 times more likely on those roads that are 35 miles an hour or greater. That's just sort of the same data, just a different way of phrasing it. This is also where some of the roads in North Greenwich start to pop more. So we looked at speed. We also looked at areas near schools. So areas near schools, KSI crashes are 3 times more likely. Yeah, it's kind of terrifying, right? So that's another piece of the analysis. Again, an area that we might want to pay some additional attention to. Senior housing is similar. KSI crashes are 3 times more likely near senior housing. And actually, if you drill it down into just the pedestrian-related KSI crashes, it's 6.5 times more likely. So again, areas to pay extra attention to. We looked at some of the demographics like income. The low-income portions of Greenwich, crashes are 3.5 times more likely. And then we lastly looked at sort of just the places where we know that there are a lot of people walking around. And this is sort of a proxy for, we used a bunch of different proxy metrics here. So it's crosswalks and curb cuts and the train stations and bus stops, all that sort of stuff. I think the train station one, the Metro North Station, is really interesting. It's only 2% of Greenwich's roads. It's 15% of the pedestrian-involved KSIs are happening right by those train stations. So again, these are the types of areas that if our goal is to get to 0 traffic fatalities and injuries, we might put extra emphasis on trying to address conditions there. The last layer of the analysis, and by no means the least important, and in fact what we would really, really like your help with tonight, is this public input layer. And that is the question of sort of what you guys are seeing and thinking and hearing. This is a place where what we want is, when you're talking to friends and you say, oh yeah, everybody always speeds there, or oh yeah, they always take that corner really fast, or everyone comes down that corner like a devil, really, really speedy. We want that data. And we want to collect that data at a sort of a location-specific way so that we can take it from being that sort of accidental anecdote, it's just an accident waiting to happen there, and turn that into a preventative piece of information so that we can address those specific areas. So we've created an online map that I think many of you guys have seen, and it is open from now until the end of June. And the map is really based off of a lot of the data that the DPW collected last year in that series of public meetings, and it's just a slightly more location-specific version of that, trying to drill down a little bit more. And so what we do is we're going to take this data, all those 3 layers, the risk, the trends, and the public input, and we're going to put them all together once the public input map is closed. So after June, we're going to take all that data, put it all together, and create what we're calling a prioritized investment map. And that is a map that is going to take all those different weights and layers of information and put it together into a map that actually gives a pretty clear set of marching orders. These are the 10% of roads that the town should address in order to really get those traffic fatalities and injuries down to 0 or as close as we can. Okay, that was a lot. To recap, so here we are on the schedule. We are right in the middle of that interactive map section. We are right at the beginning of that public engagement. The map is going to close at the end of June, and then we're going to take all that, combine all that data I just told you about, create the prioritized investment network, and continue working on building out a final report that really synthesizes all of this. So, what we would like from you tonight. So, we have the online map, which has, I think, over 600 different comments right now. But we also have a really cool set of paper map version of this in the room right now. So if you turn around and look behind you, they're all the paper maps that some of you guys have seen. What we'd really love you to do is go find your map. And we've got all sorts of dots and stickers. Put your dots and stickers down on that map. Tell us where you are seeing those issues, those challenges. If you have to leave now or if you're online, scan the QR code. It'll take you exactly back to the same map. And we will combine all that information together to create that public input layer so that we can finish out that safety analysis and continue the really awesome work with your town and you in terms of getting to zero traffic fatalities. Thank you, guys. Maps and stickers in the back. Go.
I love scratch.
It's fun.